Week 11 is in the books, and the Lions are winning the Super Bowl. This is Stat Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight. Jamar. Alpha play chase. Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally Piss Boys here, right?
Well, Drico, were you playing Lions this last week?
Was I playing Lions? I didn't play any of the weekly stuff.
I had a decent amount of Lions. Unfortunately, I galaxy brained myself off of Amon Ra and said, "Oh, it's going to be a low passing volume day, so Amon Ra won't get there." So I was heavy on JMO and heavy on the running backs, and I had some Goff. I had actually a ton of Goff and Gibbs together in the dog bowl. Unfortunately, I had 0 Amon Ra in the dog bowl, so that was painful. I did have a team that would have shipped a dog bowl seat, except I flipped a coin between Geno and Goff because I had JSN on there, and I had done a bunch of Goff and Gibbs already. So yet again, close but no cigar. Another top 1% finish that does not result in the dog bowl seat for me.
Yeah, those are tough. That's a tough run. I know. You'll have a string where you'll just like connect, and people are like, "Wow, this guy he's really lucky."
Yeah, no one pays attention though to when you are just finishing in the top 1% and not actually winning, because that doesn't really do anything. So. Right,
yeah. But I know your theoretical EV is really high. It's just not it's not hitting right now.
Oh yeah, my Sklanskys are through the roof. So, but that's enough about my Sklanskys. Let's go ahead and get into the charts here. Got a fun quarterback chart this week.
Yeah, so this is our quarterback volume, efficiency, and rushing chart. We have a volume, our kind of measure for volume is expected points from passing. That's on the horizontal axis. Adjusted yards per attempt is our our passing efficiency metric, and then the size of the bubble corresponds to rushing. And I guess that the thing that stands out to me is that, especially in terms of passing, Burrow has just been like the king this year.
Yeah, he is. He's certainly the volume king, and he's being efficient with that volume too. So that's super exciting. I mean,
that's your elite pocket passer season.
Yeah. Burrow obviously getting a lot more passing volume than Purdy, just because the 49ers are pretty run heavy, but they're both roughly the same efficiency, where you are getting a little bit more or similar passing efficiency, you are getting a little bit of rushing with Purdy. But yeah, though, if I had to pick a pocket passer this year where I'm going to play him in like a weekly contest or something, it's Burrow or Purdy. They also coincidentally are looking like 2 of the best ball quarterbacks. Both of them were going, kind of in the 7th, 8th round there. And they both are smashing their ADPs. If I could go back in time and draft more Joe Burrow double sacks, I mean, really just Bengals onslaughts. Like, if you drafted Bengals onslaughts, you're pretty happy. I mean, even though Gesicki looks to be a little toast with Higgins being back, those early spike weeks that you got from Gesicki more than paid off his late ADP. But this is the quarterback chart. We'll get into all those other guys later. The other guy that I think is interesting, just because he's the one who's changed the most since the start of the season, I would say, is Justin Herbert, where at the very start of the season, his volume was super low. He wasn't rushing as much. He was less efficient. And all 3 of those things have improved since the start of the season. Now, the Chargers have kind of shown us that they still can be run heavy, so the bottom can sort of drop out on Herbert in any single week. But his ceiling is up there with just about, anyone else outside of the really elite guys like Lamar and Josh Allen, I think can have a higher single week ceiling and the ability to access that ceiling a little easier than Herbert. But Herbert's running a lot. I mean, if you look at the size of his bubble, like, yes, he's smaller than, Kyler and Josh Allen and Lamar. But over the past few weeks, I mean, he's got some designed runs. He's scrambling a lot more. And he looks good.
I will say, just if some gentle pushback, we did just see his highest expected points season, our game of the season in prime time. Like essentially in his 10 games or so, we saw the highest game that he's put up in terms of expected points. His week 9 was total expected points was 19.9 in week 11. He had 19.1 in week 9 or week 10, I should say. Then he had 18.1 a couple weeks ago, week 8, and I guess the last couple of weeks have been really high. It just seems like more of a question of, is that like a long-term trend with Herbert just gushing over the quarterback? Or like, I don't want to overreact to some kind of like recency bias where they were playing the Bengals, he was slicing and dicing, and that's the high watermark for him for the season.
No, I think that's a good point. And prior to the Bengals game, they did have a week of lower passing volume where they kind of went back to what we had expected from them prior to the season and then to start the season. But those 3 games prior to that, they were positive pass rate over expected, which was a huge deviation for the Chargers. So
right.
I think it's
we didn't think that was in the range of outcomes going into the season.
Right. I think
so the fact that it's there is positive.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a trend, but I don't think that it's like, oh yeah, this is the new normal. I think it's just, hey, like, this is the ceiling that the guy has access to, and he can cook like this. So I'm pretty excited. Like, if you got Herbert on a best ball team, you're really excited about, getting him pick 120 to 140 or something like that. That was a smash. The Herbert pick is looking pretty good. And then really like the actionable thing for this, because like not like you can do anything about your best ball stuff, is in weekly formats. Like, I'm certainly into playing Herbert. Really, like, I'd want to do it in games where I think the Chargers are more likely to be pushed, because that's kind of what had to happen here. The Bengals, he started strong, and then the Bengals fired back and pushed him to be able to access that ceiling. The other thing is, as far as playoff best ball is concerned, the Chargers look pretty interesting to me now. And the fact that Herbert, just looks like he has a much better ceiling. I think the floor is still low with Herbert because you could just get those really run-heavy games. But the fact that he has that ceiling makes me pretty excited about him and Chargers stacks in general in playoff best ball.
Yeah, makes sense. So it looks like I don't have I'm just looking at playoffstatus.com. I don't know if that's how reputable that is, but I'm kind of getting the sense that they're really high probability to make the playoffs.
Yeah,
and then the bookies aren't giving them a lot of probability to advance far from there. Where like the mat is the mat, they're probably going to the playoffs with that 7-3 record. And you're kind of you're getting to play them as kind of like early upsets in probably again, I don't know what kind of seeding they're looking at, but it's not going to be a wild card seed, and you're getting access to a ceiling here that is at a good price.
Or wait, the Chargers are almost guaranteed a wild card seed, right? Because the Chiefs are going.
Oh, you're right. Sorry.
Yeah, so you get the wild card seed for the Chargers.
Okay, and so that's why you're getting the low Super Bowl probability, because they're kind of locked into having a tough round 1 matchup and a tough round 2 matchup.
Yeah, Yeah, I think in our stuff we've got them as like around a 10% chance of making it to the conference championship.
Right.
Which, I mean, for where you can get them in playoff best ball is still pretty intriguing to me.
Right.
The other quarterback that I had a note on that I think we have to touch on, and he's the belle of the ball in playoff best ball, is Jared Goff. So the Lions have shown us that the ceiling for a Lions game actually doesn't have to come from a game where they're pushed. It can just come from a game where they are by far the superior team, because Dan Campbell does not give a fuck about your feelings. He's going to hang 50 on you if he can. And what a fun game to watch. I mean, that was the Lions just like, it was an absolute clinic. It felt like every single time they touched the ball, it was inevitable that they were going to drive the field. Like it never looked like there was any question that, yep, the Lions have the ball and they're going to score. That did make it pretty fun for DFS stuff if you had any Lions going. Also, Jamison Williams with the Marshawn Lynch hold my dick celebration into the end zone was an all-timer. So shout out to JMO for that one. I think the actionable takeaway here, though, is that you get the Goff ceiling through absurd efficiency when the Lions just roll a team. And I mean, when you get to playoff best ball, the Lions just look like a near mortal lock for the bye. And then, you know, as strong a favorite to make the conference championship as you can really have in the NFL.
Yeah, they look really likely to make the conference championship, really likely to make the Super Bowl, and a very potent offense. So I have to assume the Lions are just very expensive across the board.
Yeah, they are. The funny thing is they're still too cheap in playoff best ball. They'll get there. Like, it's just a way too early contest right now, and people seem to really not know what they're doing in those. So the Lions are still far too cheap. You can occasionally get some really insane Lions combinations. Basically, if you're able to get Goff, one of the running backs, and Amon Ra, that's like the stone cold nuts right now. It's pretty hard to do that, but if you can get it, that's really, really good.
Right. Makes sense for sure.
The last quarterback I had a note on here was Anthony Richardson, who had a pretty good game here in his comeback appearance. What do you think about Anthony Richardson? Is he back?
If you recall, I was cautiously kind of optimistic about him going into last week, and I think that what we saw is, hey, this is a young quarterback who has rushing upside, who throws it deep, and his weekly ceiling is really, really high. And then you saw a week where it looks as if they game planned a little bit better. Like they rushed them much more often than they had before. It looked like he was very accurate, and then the receivers were actually catching the accurate passes. I think that it's more likely than not. I don't know if it's guaranteed, but it's more likely than not than we saw that we just saw a stretch of games that were just kind of like, how do I say it? It was a bad run for him, where he had a series of very, very low scores, and that we should be a lot closer to the start of the season when we project Anthony Richardson, is what I think.
Yeah, he had his best completion percentage of the season. Outside that Steelers game where he only threw 4 passes, completed 3 of them. But yeah, his best completion percent of the season, almost 300 yards, 272 yards. Like I think it's pretty clearly his best passing performance. Certainly his best pass grade that PFF has given him. So it was very promising. The other takeaway that I had just from watching the game was Josh Downs is so good. If Anthony Richardson can he doesn't have to play this good every week, because I think this is a high watermark for the caliber of his passing.
Well, the PFF they charted him with an 89% accurate pass. So like if you I guess that's his completion percentage plus drops.
Yeah,
89%. That is really high.
No, yeah,
that kind of yards per attempt.
Yeah, he was cooking. And I don't think that this is the new normal for him. But what I'm saying is, if he can just be, in this direction compared to how he was to start the season, if he's more in this direction of what we saw this last week, against a pretty good Jets defense, now the wheels are seeming to fall off for the Jets, but I do want to give Anthony Richardson his flowers, and I just think Josh Downs is so good that as long as Anthony Richardson can play okay, I think it might just be the Josh Downs, Anthony Richardson show. The way that I plan on playing this offense next season in best ball, I would assume that Richardson probably gets a lot cheaper than he was this year, so he'll probably be a little more palatable. Josh Downs is like the only guy that I am really all that interested in. If any of the other guys have any kind of price tag on them, like if you'll give me A.D. Mitchell or Alec Pierce for free, I'll take him as like an 18th round guy to pair with Anthony Richardson. But Josh Downs looks like so far and away the best receiver on this team. I mean, did you see that diving full extension catch that he had, where it was a pretty good ball from Richardson? I think it was a little out in front of him, but Josh Downs just made it look like that was exactly how they drew it up. It was beautiful.
I didn't catch that one, but no surprise. He's been balling all year.
Yeah, he's great. One of my favorite receivers in the league right now. He's a treat to watch. All right, those were all the quarterback notes I had. Did you have anyone else you wanted to talk about?
Well, I do remember you saying that you had wanted to touch briefly on Russell Wilson. Just kind of note someone going back down to Ertz in a pretty plus matchup too.
Yeah, it turns out that when he doesn't connect for like 3 touchdowns in a game on moonballs that are basically 50-50, he's much less efficient. Yeah, I believe he took 3 sacks in this game, had another turnover-worthy play, which PFF actually charted him for this time. I've griped about that they've not been charting him with turnover-worthy plays when he certainly had them. They definitely gave him one this time. He had a pretty high number of attempts. It's his highest all season. And yeah, just did not look good. His worst yards per attempt.
He had 4.4 adjusted yards per attempt on 36 attempts. And then you mentioned the sacks. He had the interception.
Yeah, four sacks, which does not get factored in to adjusted yards per attempt. But I'm thinking we should figure out something to do with sacks next season, Drico.
Well, we can factor that into adjusted yards per dropback, which is adjusted yards per dropback was 3.9, and that is very, very poor. So he had a bad game against the Ravens, bad game.
The literal nut spot. He could not show up.
Right, he fumbled the nuts.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I expected him to regress. I didn't expect it to be like poop your pants like this level.
Right.
Now, the funny thing is, Steelers still win the game because the Ravens also happened to fumble the bag here.
Right. Well, I mean, that wasn't enough to save Justin Fields. A good record was not good enough to save him. So if we continue to see performances like this from Russ, then I do think we're on bench watch.
Yeah, I think
for Russ.
He's certainly got a longer leash than just the one game, right? But
I'm saying like, hey, let's keep an eye out on this to see if he continues playing like this.
Yeah, if he strings 3 stinkers together, I would think it's squarely in the range of outcomes for Fields to come back in just in time for the playoffs.
Right.
Fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, and perhaps the Steelers are likely to make the real playoffs too, aren't they?
They're locked to make the playoffs, basically, yeah.
So Justin Fields in playoff best ball. You
Oh,
heard it here
baby.
first.
Oh, baby. Honestly, it's a really weird spot because the Steelers and Chargers are two of the better or the most mispriced teams for playoff best ball, given their probability of actually making the playoffs and like ability to maybe win a game or two. So they're pretty mispriced. But the Steelers.
But you're going to go with the Chargers over.
I'm going.
Steelers.
I'm definitely Chargers over Steelers because if you told me like which of these teams actually could have a chance of making it to the Super Bowl, there's an outcome where the Chargers can make it. I don't really feel that way about the Steelers, but man, it would be really interesting. I mean, even if there's any kind of ambiguity about the quarterback situation, it gets to be really weird to draft the Steelers in playoff best ball. Like if we get 2 bad games from Russ in a row and they haven't benched him yet, but it's like the rumor mill is out, like, oh,
right.
Justin Fields could be back. Like that's a really interesting spot for playoff best ball.
Yeah, because Fields will be undrafted, but with a very good ceiling.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the running backs.
Am I in the right? Did you? Okay, this is the chart we actually want to.
I apologize. I maybe put the charts together in the wrong order.
No worries at all. And so, I think, and we can move over these ones pretty quickly. I think our general sort of takeaway on the snaps and usage chart was kind of that we're just seeing a continuation of sort of established trends where we touched on last week CMC straight to the top. We've been talking all year about Chuba Hubbard. I guess it's worth asking, like, do we think Chuba Hubbard is at risk here at the top with Jonathan Brooks back next week?
I mean, I certainly expect Brooks to get some touches. I would, if you made me set a line for it, I'd say that Brooks probably gets like less than 20% of snaps in the first week. They've just been so slow to bring him along that do they really value him more than, sorry, not value, are they really going to play him that much more than Miles Sanders was playing? Right. I think that if they do, number one, I don't think that's likely in the first game. If they do play him more than that as the season progresses, it's because they need to get a better sense of like what he is, or they really want to see him in action to know. Because again, it's a lost season for them. It doesn't mean anything, right? So I would think they want to be pretty cautious with
right. He needs to blow the barn doors off to play, I think.
Yeah,
like, if he's just fine, it's going to be the Chuba show, and they'll be like, okay, Brooks, this is kind of getting you ready for next year.
Even if he blows the barn doors off, I don't think, just like put yourself in their shoes real quick. Like he blows the barn doors off, and so then you know that like this is the guy, and like we've got something we can build around next year. Chuba and him, this incredible 1-2 punch on the ground. We're all set there. We can address other positions. Do you even like?
Well, I'm thinking first about it through the lens of Chuba Hubbard, who right now is an incredible running back start, or not incredible, but a strong running back start. And what I'm saying is, Brooks has to blow the barn doors off to knock him off that spot, which would I think turn it into a 50-50.
Yeah,
but not put Brooks as a clear 1A.
Yeah, I agree. I think 50-50 is probably his best case scenario. And really, the thing that's hard to parse is how much would they value like protecting Chuba from not getting him too many carries versus protecting Brooks and not getting him too high a workload coming off the injury. I think if I had to guess, they're going to prioritize protecting Brooks, even though they very clearly like Chuba. They just gave him the extension. If I had to guess, the lean is going to be to protect Brooks, and that's going to mean Chuba's probably the favorite.
The only thing is, so I know it's Canales' first kind of like year, so he has some job security. But I have to believe he's like under pressure to get some wins too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know with Tepper how to, like, you would think that they should be really happy just tanking it, but
right.
Who knows? Maybe there is some internal pressure to get a win.
Right. I mean, there certainly has been.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of all, the totality of our notes on this chart that we haven't talked about all season.
We could quickly touch on Kareem Hunt, who's had a pretty solid.
Oh yeah. I had that note, didn't I?
Yeah, but I mean, we get Pacheco coming back now. Do you think that Kareem Hunt is totally useless going forward? What is his outlook like?
So the Kareem hunting was always kind of like a volume play, where his expected points was so good that it doesn't matter that he's old, that he's like in prior years he's been bad. So, but I think, and like we're going into week 12 now. I do think by playoff weeks, he's going to be pretty marginal. Like in like a month's time, if Pacheco's in line to play next week in a month's time, like I think you're probably going to get Pacheco back at his old role.
Yeah, I agree. Kareem Hunt at this point just looks like slightly better Ezekiel Elliott on a better offense than the Cowboys. Also, he's dealing. His knee got banged up a couple weeks ago, and I do think, I mean, he wasn't efficient before, but he's looked even less efficient these last couple
and
weeks.
that's kind of the point with older backs, that they get banged up more often, that they take longer to heal, and that's just part of the calculus for them. I think.
Don't tell that to Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara this season.
Well, is maybe am I just
you're right. I'm just giving
us a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, Kareem Hunt, I guess he's only 29. Yeah,
he's 29. Those other guys are like 28, 30, 29.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, no, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain who's bawling his eyes out because he's running as bad as you possibly could imagine with these ageless wonders at running back.
I salute them.
The only other note I had here was the Javonte Williams versus Audric Estime, but I think they are on the next chart.
Okay.
Yeah, so Javonte Williams, Audric Estime kind of seems like at this point it's a coin flip. Who knows who's going to be the guy to actually lead the Broncos in
right.
It
kind of reminds me of when I got so excited about the Troy Franklin game, where he was high in routes. He had the really high targets per run, and then they just didn't play him the next week.
Yeah, the classic Sean Payton run pull. So start any Broncos player at your own risk. That's basically the takeaway.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go backwards to the running back efficiency charts now.
Let's go backwards, not forwards.
So on these ones, man, the first guy I got to point out, you know what this reminds me of? So talking about Ken Walker here, you can see him. He's the smallest bubble in the 15 to 20 expected fantasy point band. Do you know who this reminds me of, Drico? It's like eerily similar to the Travis Etienne season of last year, where I feel like by week 4, week 5, I think on this show we talked about like, oh yeah, Travis Etienne, we would take him at the 2-3 turn if we knew that this was how the season was going to play out. He's crushing, one of the best backs in fantasy. And then as the season went on, he just couldn't maintain that efficiency. And he had the passing game role just like Walker did. And so I'm, not to pattern match here, but were we too out over our skis on Ken Walker to start the season because this is the archetype of this is what Ken Walker is. He can deliver these hyper efficient performances on these breakaway runs, and he can do that. The big difference, I guess, this year is that he's been so involved in the receiving game, so you do have that added wrinkle to really bolster his profile. But I feel like from a rushing perspective, this is just Ken Walker is who we thought he was. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think that in terms of the efficiency as a rusher, I think he's been fine the last couple of games. Not fantastic, but he's been fine. The piece that's kind of tailed off here is his receiving role has kind of tapered down. He had a really strong couple of weeks in a row. His week 5 through 8, he averaged 9.5 expected receiving points per game, and then that didn't. I guess that doesn't seem to have sustained. And then like I said, I think his yardage has been fine. The big knock has been the touchdowns. For example, week 8, he was 9.2 touchdowns under expected. Sorry, not 9.2 touchdowns under expected. So that would 9.2 points. So 1.5 touchdowns under expected, and then minus 3.4 in week 9. I think those are the big kind of pieces driving this. So I would kind of lean that this kind of efficiency stuff is driven mostly by week-to-week touchdown variance. You don't typically see the games that he's having from elite running backs. They normally play a little bit better than he has. I think he's played fine, but just it is kind of maybe you worry that his play style does come with those down efficiency weeks on rushing, but I would I'm not freaking out about Kenneth Walker at all. Is what I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really didn't have any other notes on this specific chart. I mean, we can briefly touch on Austin Ekeler, I guess. He saw a lot of work in that game against the Eagles where he was just a check down monster. Gretsch actually had a note in Stealing Signals that Daniels has not been passing deep as well after the rib injury, and he hasn't been running as much either. And so I think, when you combine those two things, it does seem like a recipe for Austin Ekeler to get a lot more work there. And he's just kind of assuming the role of underneath pass catcher, kind of taking away from Ertz as well. So he's at the very least interesting. He's more of a floor play type guy. I think the ceiling is a little hard for him to access, but with Brian Robinson in, just because Brian Robinson's going to, at the very least take away a little bit of the touchdown equity from Ekeler. But Eckler's interesting to say the least. If you were drafting a playoff basketball team, Drico, and you're in the last round and you've got a Commanders, piece, you've got Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, and Brian Robinson's been taken. But you're in the 10th round. You got all that you need for the Super Bowl matchup already, and this is just to help you advance out of round 1. Would you take Austin Ekeler, or let's say that you've got, let's say you're doing it with the Bills, who you think are getting the bye. So you want Austin Ekeler, or do you want a random chief dart throw who's likely to go further in the playoffs, but probably project less than Ekeler, like a Juju? You take an Ekeler or Juju there?
So, I actually have kind of a problem. So, what we're saying is the Commanders piece here is to help you advance out of week 1, and we want to take Austin Ekeler. You're the playoff expert, and is definitely relative to me. But in that spot, I'd almost prefer like a one-off that maybe from like the NFC or the AFC side, where they at least have like a strong like week 1 projection. If I'm going to go that route, it
Gotcha.
would be because, and the reason I say that is, it's not that he hasn't had any good games, Austin Ekeler, but I do think when you have somebody who's like such a huge dog to make the conference championship, when you take them on a playoff basketball team, you do want them to score good points in that 10 outcome where you're right. You do want that player to project well when you hit.
So you're not super interested in Ekeler going forward, thinking maybe that increase in usage was maybe just an aberration from the Eagles game, not something where he's going to see this increased passing volume coming in.
Yeah, I mean, so in week 9, which I believe Brian Robinson missed, that's the only other week where you see strong receiving workload for Austin Ekeler. Like week 10, he was 1.4 expected receiving points. Week 8, 5.7. Week 7, 3.1. Week 6, 5.9. Like, yeah, I think the statistics kind of lean that way more than not.
Okay. Let's go to the other running back efficiency chart here, because there were a couple notes I had on this other one. The first one is that the Christian McCaffrey role and the Devon Achane role appear to be quite similar. They're Spider-Man meme here. Now, the Christian McCaffrey has not been quite as efficient as Devon Achane in his first couple games back. So the larger bubble, Devon Achane, is simply eating the smaller bubble, Christian McCaffrey, on this chart. But they're both seeing fantastic expected fantasy points in the receiving game and getting very solid workloads on the ground as well. I mean, Devon Achane, Christian McCaffrey, you have to be super excited about both going forward. However, they're both a little dicey for playoff best ball. Christian McCaffrey is extremely overpriced right now. I would assume that corrects when we get like the real playoff best ball contests out, like the gauntlet and the mitten. I would assume that McCaffrey comes down a good chunk there, unless the 49ers are just going on a tear. But Achane, I mean, all the Dolphins are free, but again, it's pretty unlikely that they make the playoffs. They're technically still alive, though.
Right. And if I remember right, you said last year that with these super long shots, that you don't really have to go that route. That you're better off if you want to play the wild card team, you're better off waiting to the last couple of weeks, because they're still going to be cheap because their conference championship odds are going to be low, but at least you know that they're playing week 1.
Right. The way to think about it is that if you kind of think of like the probability that the Dolphins make the conference championship, right now it might be 1% or something. If they make the playoffs, what's it going to be? 6, 10?
Right.
At best.
So it's still 10 for sure.
Yeah, it's still such a small probability that it's like, great, you went from the relative value of them increased substantially, but to what it was. But then when you compare it to the other players in the pool, it's like, yeah, now he's just a viable pick. Before he was really thin. Now he's just moved to viability. And so those players,
right? You banked viability.
Yeah, you banked viability, and those players typically do not see a significant enough price increase for it to justify accepting that level of risk early on them. There are certain circumstances where you'll see a really large price increase on players like that. The 49ers would be an example, just because now, number one, they will see a decent conference championship probability if they do make the playoffs. So that drives part of it. But the market will kind of overcount stuff like that for teams like the 49ers, where it's like, oh, but this is a good team. So that's one where when they're cheap, I'm like a little bit more into the idea of taking 49ers as a risky play.
Right.
All of their fantasy assets are very good as well. It's kind of the thing that you saw with the Bills last year, where the Bills were very cheap when their probability of making the playoffs was only 13%. And so you could be really risky and accept that risk and take the Bills there. But
at least you're getting extreme closing line value if that scenario hits.
Right. And then once the Bills had a decent probability of making the playoffs, they got absurdly overpriced, like overnight. And so then you really didn't want to draft any Bills. So that's
versus like the Green Bay Packers.
Right.
Who they actually did make it and then they were still free.
Yep, exactly. So that's a spot where you can add a little value in playoff best ball. I think you need to understand the risk that you're accepting drafting teams like that early. That team has a very high probability of just going to zero before the playoffs even start. But understanding that it's going to be something you're just not going to be able to get exposure to later in a smart way. There's some value to knowing that and being willing to accept that risk. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. The other back I had a note on here was Chase Brown, and we talked about him last week. Just that the bell cow roll is absurd. I mean, when you see it with the expected fantasy points, like it's truly a crazy workload. At this point, the only thing I'm worried about is can he keep up that workload through the end of the regular season here and through the fantasy playoffs. What are your thoughts on that, Drico?
I mean, of course he can. Like, it's only a couple of games. And he didn't even play that much at the start of the year. So, sorry, are you talking about, like, if his body can hold up to that workload? I guess that's part of the question. And then it's like, do you have some kind of, like, bench risk where they work in Khalil Herbert more?
Right. Will the Bengals, do they want to keep giving him this amount of work, or are they looking at this saying,
it seems like it.
We need to get someone else in there so we're not just throwing this guy on the field for 80% of snaps?
I mean, I think they love Chase Brown. Like, there's been nothing but Chase Brown enthusiasm from the Bengals for, like, the last year. And then, interestingly, if you were looking for nuggets on why he might play less, you're not going to find them on this podcast because the thing that's interesting in the last game, they actually ramped up his pass blocking. So he had 11 pass blocking snaps in the last game. And so to me, that speaks to them trusting him. Now, let's see how I'm going to look it up. How did he actually grade out on those pass blocking snaps? But to me that is significant that they're actually not they're not pushing him down. They're actually ramping him up. They're expanding to different ways that they use him.
Yeah, I think they just got a little tired of doing let's put Tanner Hudson in the backfield and have him get a pass blocking rep. They're like, this is stupid. Chase Brown, you're good enough at pass blocking. We just rather have you out there. Allows us to do more stuff. So I think it's a sharp personnel move by the Bengals. It really is just like, can you provide minimum viable pass blocking here?
I guess he only on those 11 pass blocks he allowed one pressure. Unfortunately, that pressure did turn into a sack, but one pressure on 11 pass blocks, like that's not bad.
Yeah, Khalil Herbert also had, I don't know exactly how they'd grade this, because there was a free rusher on the play where Khalil Herbert, the one that I'm thinking of. So Khalil Herbert's on the field. He's in pass pro. There's a blitzer. Khalil Herbert picks up the rusher that he's assigned, but there's an additional free rusher. Now, part of the problem was the free rusher. The other part of the problem was Khalil Herbert did also get beat in pass protection there.
So he got he's charted with one pass block and one pressure.
Okay. Yeah, it's like borderline a not fair pressure to give him, because like there was going to be pressure regardless of if he failed or not. It did make the play a whole lot worse, though, that he gave up another rusher to the quarterback.
Yeah, they called that one a hurry, so I guess it impacted the play.
Yeah, it did. Like, if you watch that one, it like very clearly impacted the play. You probably get Burrow able to navigate the one free rusher, but when there were two, it was not something that the quarterback could overcome. So it wasn't a great look for Khalil Herbert, although not the greatest situation for him to get a pass block win in anyway.
He hasn't been trusted as a pass blocker, so like he only had 30 pass blocks last year, 30 pass blocks the year before. They like I think that passing down role is safe from Khalil Herbert.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's hit the tight end charts now.
Man, we are just motoring through these.
I know. We're making good time tonight.
So tight end utilization and efficiency. And this is our starter chart. And we're looking at what percentage of team dropbacks did they run a route, and then what percentage were they pass blocking. And then you can kind of see who's on the field for 100% of dropbacks. And I should say that for the running back and tight end charts, it's the rolling 4-week average. So bear that in mind. It's not that Zach Ertz has played every drop back of the season. He's played every drop back of the last 4 games.
Yeah, the first guy that we need to talk about is Will Dissly, who, he looks to have fully taken over the tight end 1 role for the Chargers. Now the Chargers use a bunch of tight ends. They got all these like lurch-looking motherfuckers out there on the field. God, what is the name of some guy with his number in the 40s, and he is just as wide as a house. But he was out there anyway. The long and short of what I'm getting at is the Chargers use a lot of tight ends. Will Dissly is the one that's catching passes. The other guys are out there blocking, and Dissly you can see has some pass blocking in there as well. But Dissly is the guy that they're using to catch passes. And he's looked good doing it. Like he looked pretty good. I'm into Will Dissly. I'm like, he's a very viable weekly format, like DFS and underdog battle royale type tight end. He's very viable in my book.
Right. He started the year in kind of a part-time role, and now he's kind of emerged as the full-time route runner. He's running all the routes. He's getting lots of targets. It's kind of I think you're kind of looking at the Dalton Schultz, the kind of like running lots of routes, getting targets. It's not very deep down the field role, but that's very playable in fantasy. That's very playable, especially with how late he went. Like he's a strong pickup if you have a need a tight end and you need to play somebody. I think you can plug and play him every week. Yeah,
absolutely. The other guy that I had a note on is Evan Ingram. The upside seems like totally gone out of this Jaguars offense with Mac Jones, but he's back on his PPR scam bullshit, right? Gabe Davis is out for the season now as well. So it's just Evan Ingram and Brian Thomas Jr. out there catching poorly thrown balls from Mac Jones. But the floor for Evan Ingram, while still it's not a rock solid floor, because you can just have the full Mac Jones implosion weeks where it doesn't matter and there's not going to be anything. But he's like a solid guy if you got to start him in a pinch. By the way, I did find the name of the other Chargers tight end I was thinking of. I believe it was Tanner Fisk.
Tucker Fisk.
Tucker Fisk. Thank you. But yes, Tucker Fisk. I did play a little bit of him on the showdown slate, believe it or not. And then as soon as I saw him on the field, I knew that it was a mistake to have played him, even at $200.
So I want to note here. I made a mistake on Will Dissly, or not a mistake. There was a typo in one of the formulas. I should say that if you look at his his route percentage is closer to 65%. So he would that mea culpa. There was a I don't know what happened, but there was something wrong in the formula, and so he's on the field about 70%. So he's still on their starter chart, but he's somewhere between Noah Fant and Chig, and so maybe my comment there about him being playable every week probably not quite correct.
Yeah, he is getting lots of targets, but that is a good point that he's not actually out there for all of the dropbacks. Good job. We are not spreading fake news, so that's
yeah. I was like, I spotted it, and I was like, I could just move on, but I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression.
Yep. Okay, the next tight end I had a note on. I mean, we have to talk about Jonnu, one of the three monster performances. We're not even mentioning Brock Bowers' monster performance because that's just like what we've come to expect from him. He's the tight end one next year, like full stop. I don't care if the market is taking anyone other than Brock Bowers as tight end one next year. I'll have 100% Brock Bowers. I don't give a shit. But for Jonnu, he had a pretty incredible ceiling game as well. And I mean, Pat had brought this up to me a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Dolphin stuff on our preview pod. But Jonnu really looks like he is kind of just he stole Jalen Waddle's lunch. It looks like as you know where he's at on the for the offense. Like in the offensive hierarchy for the Dolphins right now, it really feels like it's Achane 1, Tyreek Hill 2, Jonnu Smith 3, and Jalen Waddle 4. And I mean, really the thing is when you're talking about Dolphins players, like when the offense is humming, there can be a lot of touchdowns to go around. And now they're not going to play the Raiders every single week, but Jonnu getting the 2 touchdowns, like you can very easily see that he's got access to this monster ceiling. So he's certainly interesting in that regard. Definitely a viable guy in weekly DFS formats.
Yeah, I mean the thing about he's running like what, something 75% of routes. He's getting the good what is it, the 21% targets per run. That's pretty good. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next tight end. I mentioned this earlier, but Mike Gesicki seems like he's probably dead with T. Higgins back. I mean, I'm sure there will be games where he gets a couple targets here and there, but that role where Gesicki seemed like the legitimate number 2 pass catcher on the Bengals very logically has gone away with Higgins back. The other guy that I had a note on here is...
Well, I guess the only thing that's interesting about Gesicki here is that he did run 77% of routes. Now, like, he was not targeted. He got 2 targets on those on 56 on actually I can't see how many routes. So 77% on 56 dropbacks. So probably around 40. Yeah, he had around 40 routes, 2 targets. I don't know if I want to call that dead. Like, it'd be different if, like, they were like, oh, no, step aside, Gesicki, T. Higgins is back. You don't even get to play. I still think somebody who's in the 75% of routes range is interesting, but the number, if he's the number 3 or 4 target behind 2 receivers that dominate targets, it is a lot less interesting.
Yeah, I more so, when I called him dead, I more so meant like the ceiling that we saw from him earlier, where he's getting 7 targets and he's live for 2 touchdowns. Like, that's just not really going to happen with T. Higgins and Chase active. Again, which makes sense. And like I said, he might have some games where he gets a few receptions here and there, but the ceiling is different with T. Higgins in the lineup.
Right.
The next guy whose ceiling is also affected by another player being active in the lineup is Mark Andrews. And with Isiah likely back and then playing a very important division game against the Steelers and a very close game, they went to likely a lot. So it was pretty concerning for Mark Andrews, in my opinion. But how do you parse this Ravens tight end situation, Drico?
So Mark Andrews, he had only 58% of routes run, 14% targets per out run. So that works out that he got 3 targets. And then if I look at likely, so likely 53% routes run, 26% targets per out run, 5 targets. Now, he did corral those targets into 75 yards, so he had that good game. That feels like a true tight end committee to me. Like, both of these guys are at around 50% route run. I guess I'm happy that, like, I'm happy for likely that he still had the good game, but neither of those usages look strong. It kind of does look like they're just cannibalizing each other.
I agree 100%. It does make it pretty tough for playoff best ball as well. The way I'm reading this for playoff best ball is, if I'm playing Ravens to the Super Bowl, I'm definitely interested in both, because when you get all the way down to the Super Bowl, it doesn't really matter. Like a very small amount of points can be extremely important in that format. But if you're just grabbing like a random Ravens one-off and you're not even playing them as a Super Bowl team, I have virtually no interest in any of these kind of tertiary Ravens pass catchers, and that includes likely and Andrews.
Right. Yeah, makes sense for sure. Makes sense for sure.
Okay,
go ahead.
We do have to talk about Taysom Hill, who put up maybe one of the greatest tight end, in quotes, games of all time. In the first quarter of the game, I just thought Taysom was going to bury everyone from a PPR scam. He had something like 8 targets and 5 receptions in the first quarter of the game, or something, or maybe it was just 5. I think he ended with 8 targets, but
he ended with 10 targets.
Okay, yeah. So he has like 5 receptions in the first quarter, and I'm thinking, oh God, I didn't play enough Taysom Hill. I was more than double the field of the dog bowl, still not enough. And of course, he just continued. He buried you in every conceivable way Taysom Hill could bury you. He caught passes. He threw passes. He rushed the ball. He had breakaway plays. Like, it was incredible. So he's had a couple now big spike weeks. And in DraftKings, he was going in the somewhere between 140s and 120s for most of the summer. I would argue that he's like the best tight end pick on DraftKings by cost. Just the fact that you can drop a 40 at the tight end position. If this happens in a playoff week, in one of the best ball playoff weeks, like, Taysom Hill ends up being an absolute league winner, like have to have him type of guy. So, it seems set up very well for Taysom Hill the rest of the way. Like, the Saints depth chart is just decimated at wide receiver. They're extremely thin at running back too. And he's also their best tight end. So it's like, he's just going to get there by being the jack of all trades. And I think it could be a really fun season to have some Taysom Hill in best ball.
Yeah. Very, very strong DraftKings pick. Like, good. Honestly, you were happy with his score at quarterback in FFPC and Underdog last week. But yeah, very, very, very strong. The other one here that's kind of I know we had Luke Schoonmaker in prime time. He had like something ridiculous, like what was it, 10 targets. And what's kind of interesting there is he only ran a route on 50% of dropbacks. He had a really high, he had a 32% targets per run, and 50% of routes. Well, they had 62 dropbacks, so he had 31 routes. I guess the question, the question or the conclusion that comes to my mind is that's kind of a product of 62 dropbacks. But is that just something that we could see a lot from the Cowboys going forward, and you're going to get these just random dudes who get 10 targets in a game?
Yeah, I mean, Schoonmaker specifically, I think, is viable if you're going to get Ferguson missing time. But, I mean, Cooper Rush did not look good, and it just looked like Luke Schoonmaker was a nice safety blanket, right? And so I don't know how bad the Ferguson injury is going to be. Maybe just a week, but
yeah, I thought I saw a quote that McCarthy was asked about it, and he was like, "It's not looking likely for next week."
Right. I would anticipate at least 1 week of Schoonmaker, and so really the only actionable stuff I can give you on Schoonmaker is it's probably like it's an okay plug and play one time like tight end streamer type thing. I'd assume he's probably like min price on DraftKings as well, so maybe you can punt.
Dude, I mean, the question that comes to me is, so I accept that in these 62 dropback games, somebody other than CD Lamb has to get targets. I that makes sense to me. But the question, is it always going to be Schoonmaker?
I don't think we can say, just because we don't have
right. I don't think so either.
But what I'm saying is, say Schoonmaker's 2,500 on DraftKings, and say you think the Cowboys are only going to have 30 dropbacks. If he gets 4 targets, even like 4, if I'm getting 4 targets at 2,500, I'm pretty happy with it, right?
I mean, at 30 dropbacks, and then let's say he doesn't have a 32% targets per run, he has an 18% targets per run. Then you're looking at 2 targets.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's probably pretty fringy, but it's someone that's worth having on your radar, I would say.
Yeah, for sure, worth having on your radar. For sure. It just, I guess, those are the types of targets that we're going to be looking at here on the Cowboys, and I guess thinking about it. So Rico Dowdle, he did get 5 targets. He didn't do a lot with them. But if that's going to be the type of target that the offense relies on, somebody like him could be stronger, because it could be Rico Dowdle next week who gets 10 targets.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was looking at the Cowboys schedule here. You will have a couple showdown slates coming up for them because you get them on Thanksgiving. And then I believe that the game they have against the Bengals, which is a few weeks away now.
What's drier, the turkey or the Cowboys offense?
Yeah, the Cowboys offense, not particularly inspiring. But yeah, if Ferguson misses time long term, look for Luke Schoonmaker on a showdown slate near you.
Yeah, makes sense. Probably time for us to kick this over to wide receivers.
Yep, let's do wide receivers here.
And so our wide receivers chart, we've got weighted targets per run, which is kind of our metric for how often not only are they targeted on their routes, but how often are they targeted downfield. It weighs those down the field targets more heavily. And then we plot that against fantasy points per game because that's ultimately what it's all about.
Yeah, so the notes that I had, the first one I had was we finally get the Amon Ra Nuke game. He's had a pretty quiet season. Definitely like lower target volume for him this year than in years past. I don't think prior to this game, I think he only had the one game over, I want to say 8 targets. I'm going to fact check myself on that. But he finally gets the big game here and reminds you that he does have access to that absolutely incredible ceiling. Yeah, so he had the 18 target game in week 2. Other than that, no games over 8 targets, and he only had 3 8-target games, the other ones being 7, 2, 4, 6, and 6. So really, really low target volume for him this year compared to what he's had in the past, outside of those 2 monster games. But the fact that he has those games in his bag, still certainly encouraging. I was a little concerned that this was just going to be like the new normal for Detroit, and it was going to be really hard for him to have these ceiling outcomes like that. He's got a couple good games coming up on the schedule as well, too. You get the Colts next week, where, they're not quite as terrible as the Jaguars, but I could certainly see that being another big game for the Lions before they end up against some pretty strong defenses where they get Chicago twice in 4 games. They get Buffalo, they get Green Bay. But yeah, really for me, the biggest takeaway was because I was starting to get concerned about like, God, I want to draft Amon Ra for playoff best ball, but do I just take Gibbs over him instead? But I think after this game, just reminding me like, hey, this ceiling is still very much in the range of outcomes. I'm very comfy having Amon Ra as, one of the best clicks in playoff best ball.
Makes sense for sure. Makes sense. Then you also had kind of like notes here that Chase and T. Higgins both smashing, and it does seem like they're just both consolidating those targets so heavily. Burrow is playing so well. Their defense sucks, so their volume is good, and it is making for a pretty nice season for the both of them.
Yeah, I mean they are both over 55% weighted targets per route run, or I think Chase might be just a lick under. That's kind of where the median or the midpoint line is right there. But yeah, Chase and Higgins are absolutely consolidating everything on the offense, and they're smashing with it. I mean, the Bengals onslaughts really do look like what you need. The Bengals are just the most consolidated offense in all the best ways. You get Chase Brown doing everything on the ground, and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins consolidating everything through the air. If you've got a Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Chase Brown stack in best ball, that team's probably advancing, and you're probably feeling pretty good about it heading into the fantasy playoffs. The other dynamic duo of receivers that I think we have to talk about is Cooper Kupp and then his teammate Puka Nacua, who actually is still languishing down on the 40 to 70% routes run chart just because of some weird. He's had some.
He got ejected. He got injured.
Got ejected. Got injured. Missed some the first game that he.
And he's only played in 5 games.
Yep, first game he's back from injury. They were really light with his snaps, so you got those things holding him back down there. Didn't stop his performance this week though. Both Puka and Kupp exploded this week. Shout out to Pat for. Pat's walkthrough is always very good. But this week, he was just so on it. Like pretty much every takeaway that I had from reading the walkthrough and adjustments that I made to my process for playing in the draft games and playing DFS this week, like Pat literally knocked it out of the park for everything. He had Puka Nacua as the cover boy. Puka just absolutely explodes in the first half. Like if you were playing a lot of Puka, you were resting easy after that first half. he also mentioned that Stafford was in a phenomenal spot for regression, for positive regression. Stafford ends up with the 4 touchdowns in the super efficient game. Just had to give some flowers to Pat there for a job well done on the walkthrough, per usual. But this week was really a very nice one. But the Higgins and Chase and Kupp and Puka thing, just to me highlights another point that I feel like we need to make, because every year I feel like we have to have this discussion when people are drafting best ball teams where people are like, oh, you can't take both. If you take Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, they're just too expensive to take together. It's like, no. Like, these guys are correlated. They can have good games together. Like, trust me, like, it is good to have them. And even in the games where one of them gets there at the cost of the other one getting there, that's still not a bad thing for you in best ball. Like, you're helping to raise your floor and you're raising your ceiling in the same, like, with the same pick. So it's not a bad thing to be taking players from the same offense. And you can see it with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase as well. Now, you can look at the examples of when it goes bad is Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. But again, like, those outcomes are correlated together. Like, you're getting worse outcomes for Tyreek and worse outcomes for Waddle because you have the quarterback injury that affects them both. You have the Dolphins involving their running backs much more in the passing game, involving Jonnu Smith in the passing game. Like, so they're correlated outcomes. And yes, when it goes bad, it feels really bad because it's going badly together. But when it goes well, like, if you have the Bengals onslaught here, you're laughing straight to the bank. Like, these teams look incredible. And same thing with the Rams. Now, the Rams, you got the Puka injury and the Kupp injury early in the season. But, man, if you've got, like, a Stafford double that somehow makes it into the best ball playoffs, like, I'm pretty excited about that. So I had to get on my soapbox there for just remember this next year when you're drafting best ball teams and people are telling you, like, oh, you really don't want to take the 2 guys that are expensive together on the same offense. Like, just not wait it, because when it works out, it's really good.
And then your next question here was, aren't you worried about Malik Nabers with DeVito starting? And I'm having a tough time being worried about Nabers after going through the Danny Dimes story. Now, I guess Dimes is not, I guess he's not the absolute worst, but he was pretty bad. And I do think that Nabers is so important for the offense. He's going to get so many targets that I think you're probably looking at outcomes pretty close to the start of the season where he's just going to dominate targets. And you just have to hope that Nabers plays like Nabers and he dominates with the ball on receptions as well as with targets. Yeah,
that makes sense. And I agree with you on that one there. But I do think that it was important to talk about. I think a lot of people are probably worried about Malik Nabers going forward. I had a question that a friend of mine reached out with, just normal home league. He's got CeeDee Lamb, Malik Nabers, and someone sent him the trade offer of Nico Collins for Lamb plus Nabers. Which side of that do you prefer?
Ooh. I think I want to keep Nabers and Lamb.
That's what I said. But I don't think it's egregious if you want to go get Nico. But yeah, I think you just hold Nabers. I think his value is still pretty high. But
yeah,
I did want to get the sanity check from you because he.
Yeah, I mean, going both ways is the gap between Malik Nabers and Nico a CeeDee Lamb gap, and is the gap between CeeDee and Nico Malik Nabers gap? No, it just I agree.
Moving on, the next guy I had a note on. Oh man, Drico, I think it might be finally happening. is the JSN breakout upon us?
I think we're in the JSN breakout. Now it is what are we looking at here? We're looking at 684 yards through 10 games breakout, so 70 yards a game. But I think we're in it. I think it's kind of turned the corner here where he's going to establish part of the offense, or not establish it, where like he's a driver of the offense.
Yeah. Now, bear with me here. Did you know that if you take his 3 best games and we just cherry pick those and say those are actually the real games for JSN,
right?
You know, the ones where he got 16 targets, 12 targets, and 11 targets. If
you throw out the one where he had 9 yards, 31 yards.
Yeah. No. Listen, throw out all the bad stuff. We're only looking at the 3 very best games from production. We're actually not even counting the 12 target, 51-yard game either, because that one doesn't feed our narrative here. But if you look at these 3 specific games, he's got a little over 400 yards in 3 games. So if you extrapolate that out to a full season, you're looking at 2,500 receiving yards in a season from JSN. So
it's pretty wild that NFL teams had backup running backs playing cornerback in 4 different games.
Yeah. I can't believe it. I thought that was just, the kind of shenanigans that went on when people were covering Ohio State receivers in college, but apparently it happens in the NFL too. So I just hope that he keeps getting to run against, backup running backs playing corner. But who knows?
I do think there's something to when DK Metcalf went out and then they expanded his route tree and it exploded to, okay, his role is kind of different now. His role is something where they trust him to push the ball down the field and make that work.
Yeah, and in this game against San Francisco too, he was the we got to get it. We need this conversion. We need this third down. He was their trusted guy on a lot of those big high leverage spots. So it's pretty encouraging to see, because I feel like in the past they would try to use DK Metcalf like that, but he really isn't that. That's not what DK Metcalf really does, and so it didn't really work that way for the Seahawks. So the other thing that I want to point out is it's not like I saw a lot of people saying oh yeah, he lined up out wide so much more after DK Metcalf was there. No, he didn't. It was almost all slot snaps in the game against the Rams, 91.5% slot snap rate. Lower slot rate, but still in line with what he's getting this season on average. This last week against San Francisco, 83% in the slot. So he's still operating out of the slot. And to me, when you get a guy that's doing what he's done now over these past couple games, where he can very clearly operate at all depths, but he's operating primarily out of the slot, that is the same archetype as the prime Cooper Kupp, the Amon Ra St. Brown, the CeeDee Lamb. That's what those guys do. And so I don't want to get out over my skis, but in best ball next year, if JSN has a late second round tag, are you taking him there?
A late second round tag? I don't think so. I think I'm looking. And maybe I have PFF brain, actually, FFPC brain.
Right.
But I'm that.
Where would you take him on FFPC, and I can translate it?
Yeah, it's going to translate pretty well, I think. I think I'm thinking somewhere third round, 3-4 turn. Yeah,
3-4. So 3-4 turn, he probably would not get up into the second round. He'd be close. It depends on the tight end. So yeah, you're saying maybe early third is where you think would be appropriate next year.
Yeah. I think that's right.
I kind of think it's inevitable. Now, granted, a lot of this, it's funny, but this is true. A lot of the way that guys get priced is how they finish the season, right? It's the what have you done for me lately, and the vividness bias and the recency bias. So if he stinks to close the season out, I think that you'll get another year where he'll be majorly discounted and you can just load up on him, which I would. But if he keeps delivering on these performances, which I think is the more likely outcome, and again, wide receiver is very volatile. I'm not saying he's never going to have a down game again. Like, he almost certainly will have a couple down games to close out the season. But if he keeps putting up these performances at least a couple more times to finish the season out, he's going to – I don't see him going any later than the third round.
Right. I mean, if he just keeps having 100-yard games every week from here on out, then, my price is going to be too cheap. He'll be a lot closer to your price.
Seahawks kind of interesting in playoff best ball as well. The whole NFC West is basically up for grabs right now with all those teams being within one game of each other. So that's kind of an interesting one to note. No one's drafting Seahawks right now. They're kind of risky. They're one of those that I'd wait and see on. But
yeah.
All right, we can go to the next chart here. And I mean, we got to talk about this guy. He is he's on the thumbnail for this week. He's the league winner. I think I talked about him on like every single podcast that I did last week. And that's Jauan Jennings, like absolute league winner. You know what's funny? If you go and look back, I'm gonna pull this up. I've already looked at it, but I'm pulling it up just to verify for myself. If you look at our charts last year for Brandon Ayuk, who was just having a hell of a season, right? Like, absolutely incredible season. Brandon Ayuk is actually basically in the exact same spot on the chart as Jauan Jennings. Brandon Ayuk averaged just about 17 fantasy points per game over the whole season. Jauan Jennings right about 15, so a little lower in what he's actually realized, but you do have, some games where he just hasn't had this same role to start the season. Brandon Ayuk, right about 60% weighted targets per route run. Jauan Jennings, a little north of 60% weighted targets per route run. I mean, listen, Jauan Jennings is in the Brandon Ayuk role right now, and I'm starting to think that Brandon Ayuk might just be a system wide receiver because Jauan Jennings looks pretty damn good to me.
Yeah, I'm going to try and frame it more as like a Jauan Jennings coming on, developing as a player. Like, it's rare that we see these late breakouts, but I think that's what we're getting here. And when he's played this year, he's very consistently been at a high targets per run. And now, last 2 games in a row, he's been 95% route run, 94% route run, and then 28% targets per run, 29% targets per run. So just very consistently earning high target volume. I guess one thing that's kind of interesting is that since the injury, his ADOT has come right down. Like, he was pretty much always above 12 in the first 6 weeks of the season, and now the week 10 and 11 he's been at 8.2 and 7. So that ADOT is coming down. So you're seeing heavy targets, lower ADOT, and I guess it's interesting that he's shown that versatility, that he's succeeded both ways. So yeah, that I do think very, very interesting player. And I'm kind of buying this late career breakout.
Yeah, if you're doing 49ers stuff for playoff best ball, Jauan Jennings is like a must-have on those teams for me. I mean, this is going to sound stupid, but I don't think Jauan Jennings is that different than Deebo Samuel from a week-to-week projection at this point. Sorry, it is what it is. And he's always going to be cheaper just because the name value of Deebo. So, but we can move on to the next guy before my love for Jauan Jennings just runneth over. Josh Downs, another one of my favorite receivers this season. He's just so fun to watch. Like, he just looks so good. Every time I see Josh Downs, he's like getting open at will. he's operating in different quadrants of the field too. He's not just this little pop gun slot guy that like gets open really quick and does the Deontay Johnson stuff. Deontay Johnson, not a slot guy, but you know what I mean, like just to get open really quick and catch the ball type guy. Like Josh Downs can do it all, and he's like very, very clearly the Colts' best receiver. I think it's the only thing that could hold Josh Downs back is if Anthony Richardson looks like he did for the first few weeks of the season. But if Anthony Richardson even plays okay, like Josh Downs is incredible.
He's having a very strong sophomore year after the injury early.
Another guy who this rookie is having a pretty strong year is Ladd McConkey. He's right near Brian Thomas on the chart, who, to be fair to Brian Thomas, we would be gushing over him too if his quarterback situation weren't so dire going forward. So he's just a little less exciting. But Ladd McConkey looks incredible. I mean, in this game,
does. I do think this is one where his role has just been so sporadic week to week.
I think it's coming on more. I think it's developing more and more, and he's becoming more of a mainstay and a staple in the offense.
He had one of his best games of the year in the last kind of primetime game. But week 10, he saw just 2 targets. And
that was the week where they really like came back down to earth though and didn't pass very much. So when they're passing
but that's like a 9% targets per run.
Right.
So I agree with you. He's having a good year, and he's very playable. Like he's playable in dailies, all that kind of stuff. But I do think his kind of week to week outlook is pretty volatile.
Yeah, I think that volatility is part and parcel with an offense that is willing to, at the drop of a hat, go minus 15% PROE. Like that's just
right. And there has been weeks. It wouldn't surprise me if there's weeks where what's his name, Quentin Johnson gets more targets than McConkey again.
Absolutely. Although recently it definitely to me it's pretty clear that McConkey is the guy they'd prefer to be throwing the ball to. Like Quentin Johnston is out there as a capable receiver, which honestly I never saw myself saying. To Quentin Johnston's credit, the thing that he was the worst at last year of literally not being able to catch the ball, he actually seems to have cleaned up pretty well this year. Like the drops are not really anywhere close to the issue that they were his rookie season, which kudos to him. Like that's a great development for him in his career. I still think McConkey is like the strongest receiver here, and will
for sure.
The thing that I'm interested in is, where do you think McConkey goes next year in best ball?
I want to guess like 4th round.
Yeah, 4th or 5th feels about right to me. It's gonna, like we talked about with JSN, it's gonna depend on how he closes this season out, right? Like
I'm kind of thinking like the Drake London is the comp. London as a sophomore is the ADP comp.
That tracks for me. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's move on to the last chart, unless there's anyone that you wanted to talk about on this one.
No. A lot of these guys we've spilt plenty of or not spilt ink. We've used oxygen on. Let's move on. Oh man, this is a messy chart.
It is a messy chart, and don't worry, you don't even really need to get lost in this.
The dots.
Yeah, in this rat's nest of dots down here, because none of these guys are really relevant. I mean, you get
right. We're past the point where a guy is just gonna like impress, or maybe not past the point, but it's a lot less likely now.
Yeah, you get DeAndre Hopkins down here purely because he is just not running a full complement of routes, and that's what he's been doing the entire season, dealing with the knee injury. He's at the very least like interesting. on the Chiefs now, but he's not a crusher by any means. Certainly a good piece in playoff best ball, though, with how likely the Chiefs are to make the conference championship and the Super Bowl, and the fact that he's like pretty clearly the number 2 behind Kelsey now. So he's very much interesting as a pass catcher. Also, the fact that all the Chiefs like tertiary pass catchers seem pretty gross this year. So it really feels like it's Kelsey and Hopkins, and then no one else. We talked about Puka already on the first chart in the context of Kupp, and we kind of explained why he's down here on this chart, just with some of the weird fluky stuff limiting his routes. But the only other guy that I think is worth talking about here, I guess there's two. I should have made a note on this guy, which we'll touch on briefly. Christian Watson did have a pretty good game. Looks like he's firmly like icing out Dontavion Wicks. So sorry to all the Wicks truthers. It does appear that Christian Watson is winning that third wide receiver role here. I'm interested. Would you ever draft Dontavion Wicks in playoff best ball, Drico, or is he just you'd rather have like Tucker Kraft or something?
Yeah, you wouldn't do it, would you? Like,
I don't think so.
So you've got of the Packers that you would draft after Jordan Love, you've got Aaron Jones, you've got Jaden Reed, you've got Christian Watson, and then Dobbs. Like I just don't think there's ever a point. Like he was at just 30% routes run last week with Christian Watson at 75%. Like as you kind of noted, Watson just icing him out.
Yeah, when in playoff best ball, when you're diving that deep, like when you're dumpster diving on a team, it has to be a team that you think is making the Super Bowl. Because that's where those dumpster diver picks can be the most valuable. It turns into like a showdown slate style of game where anyone who can, score a touchdown all of a sudden could be extremely valuable. So really the only
Packers kind of just missing the cutoff almost for that.
Yeah, and really the thing that I'm thinking is like if you are playing Packers to the Super Bowl, like you can get 5 really good Packers. Like you can go Jaden Reed, Josh Jacobs, Jordan Love, Romeo Dobbs. Christian
I said Aaron Jones instead of Josh Jacobs, didn't I?
That's okay. I didn't. I knew what you meant. But that's 5. Like you got 5 Packers right there. You're gonna have some Super Bowl opponent against them most likely. And so to me, it's like, and hypothetically, say you show up in the Super Bowl, it is the Packers. You were right. How many people are you even competing with that have Packers, that have a 5 stack of Packers in the Super Bowl? Like, it just feels unnecessary. Like, I'd rather have other guys. But anyway, the guy who I actually had a note on that we still haven't talked about is Deontay Johnson, who slowly seems like he's
up to a whopping 17% routes run.
I mean, it's more than he previously was getting.
He's up from 8% to 17%. And 2 targets, both games. Good on him.
Yeah.
And who said that he's a low ADOT merchant? His ADOT was 32, so it's 64 air yards.
That's quite a lot. Yeah, he did have a couple deep passes in this game. But
so to me, that's honestly like that's speaking to. They're like, okay, yes, you're Deontay Johnson. Yes, your main skill is getting open shallow. That's not the offense.
Yeah,
the offense is that we run deep
to us.
And if that's where he's competing with these other guys, I don't like. Why? If that's no matter what the name of the guy out there is, what their skill set is, you're just gonna have them run deep anyway. I don't know why you would play Deontay Johnson. Yeah,
so in playoff best ball, you're drafting today. You're taking your 10th pick in a Ravens.
Oh, it's just not Deontay.
Deontay or Nelson Aguilar?
I mean, I bet Nelson. Let me check Nelson Aguilar's route run. So he's at 42%. and seeing a very similar amount of targets. Like, am I allowed to take what's the number 2 guy's name again? Am I is Bateman still there?
No,
Is
Bateman.
somebody
In
does he
literally
go?
every playoff best ball draft, here's how the Ravens go. It's Derrick Henry in the first round, Lamar Jackson in the second round, Zay Flowers in either the second or the third round, and then people wait and wait and wait, and then like Mark Andrews will usually go in like the 5th, and then inexplicably someone's like, Rashad Bateman, and just takes Rashad Bateman way too early. But yes, that is he definitely goes, and he goes.
So likely, you can get likely instead of Deontay.
Likely goes before Deontay's undrafted. Likely gets drafted. But yes, you could very, very reasonably.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Especially, I think I don't see like a compelling reason for Deontay's route to increase a lot. And so I would need to see that happen before I consider him draftable.
Deontay Johnson or Tylan Wallace?
Oh, Jesus. I mean, I'm probably not drafting either of those guys.
Right. Yeah, I would not either. But yeah, I felt like we should talk about it though, just on the Deontay watch, seeing as he gets integrated into the Ravens offense. But all right, those are all the notes I had. Did you have anyone else you wanted to talk about on this chart, Drico? Oh, Drico already out. He's out of here already. Well, I guess I will. I'll close this up. I would assume Drico is going to be back here to say goodbye to you, lovely people, in just a second. But thank you for sticking with us here and making it all the way through our Week 11 episode of Stat Chasing. I believe this is a record-setting episode for our shortest one of the season. But I hope that you still found some useful analysis and nuggets to take away here as you head into Week 12 and get ready. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap us up, and we will see you here next week. Maybe Drico's power went out or something.